Let's take a look at how to use draw.io. Now in this video, I'm going to be using the desktop version, but the usage between the desktop version and the web version is practically identical. The only real difference is where are you saving your files. So when you first start up the desktop version, you should see something similar to this, asking if you want to open up an existing diagram or create a new diagram. Obviously, I'm going to go for create new in this case, but if you're working on an old diagram, then you would open up whichever one you want to work on. It will also default to the last diagram that you have open. So if you were working on a diagram previously, it will default to opening up that one. I'm going to create a new diagram. Now, which one of these really doesn't matter. It mainly just determines like what default sample information will you have from the start. You'll still have all of the tools available to you. But I'm just going to go ahead and choose the flowchart and hit create. And it's going to give you this little sort of demo sample flowchart thing here. Again, I don't want this information, so I am going to get rid of it by doing a marquee select, which is the formal way of saying left click, hold, and drag. It is a marquee select. I'm going to marquee select everything, and then I'm going to hit the delete key. Next, I'm going to collapse the general tab. There are some useful shapes here, but everything that we need is also down below in the flowchart tab. So I'm going to collapse general, and then I'm going to select flowchart. Now it is worth noting that if you did not choose the flowchart preset, you might not have this right here. And that's where this add more shapes button comes into play. As you can see, you've got a lot of different options here that we can choose to add in. And so if you do not have the flowchart option on the desktop version, you can come down here to plus more shapes and ensure that flowchart is checked. On the web version, you do not have to do this. You have all tabs available to you at all times on the web version. Now, these are the only symbols that we are going to need for doing diagramming of our programs. We're not going to use all of these symbols. Some of them are simply too archaic. For example, this one here, sequential data, which more formally is also a magnetic tape, which, again, we don't exactly use anymore. There are a small subset of these symbols that we are going to be using for this class. First symbol, the circle, just plain old circle, and it is labeled start. This should always, shockingly, be the starting point for your diagram. The next symbol that you will always have is the terminator, which is this oval, this rounded rectangle on both sides symbol. You will always have these two symbols. To add a symbol, let me just go ahead and delete both of those to re-go over this. To add a symbol, I left-click drag the symbol onto the document. Now, when you do this, you will get some auto sync lines, for lack of a better word. Like if I wanted to have this like perfectly aligned, its left edge to the center of the page, there we go. And there's one for the middle of the page right there. Let's see if I scroll up and down, I've got more document visible. And you will also, as you are dragging things around, if there's another symbol close by, it will auto align to that symbol. So you can see here, once I get my circle close enough, it will snap and tell me that the center of this shape is perfectly aligned to the center of this one here. These are conveniences. You do not have to have things perfectly aligned. They're just there in case you want to use it. In order to label a symbol, you double click on it and you can go into a text edit mode. So with this selected, or you don't have to have it selected, you can just double click on an unselected symbol, but I'm going to start with a circle, so I'm going to double click on it. And now I have a text editing cursor and I can start typing. Now you don't hit enter to finalize what you are typing. You hit enter, it is going to take you down to the next line. How you make sure that your text is finalized is you just simply click off the shape. Now my text is fixed. I can no longer edit it until I double click back in the shape. So if I double click on the shape again, now I'm back into text edit mode. I can use like the right arrow key to get rid of the highlight, or if I wanted to erase everything, I could just start typing again. And I'm going to label this end. So double click, type, and then click off. All right, now we need to display information to the user, right? Here we have the display. It's this, I honestly don't know what to describe this symbol. It's like you've got a tag. There we go, a tag. It's like an old-fashioned store tag, which now that I say that, a lot of you watching this video probably haven't seen old-fashioned store tags before. But this is kind of sort of what I used to have prices in stores for a lot of things. Okay, so this is our display. And we use this symbol anytime that we want to show the user something. So whether we're going to prompt the user to enter something, we're displaying the results, displaying a general welcome message. For example, I could just simply type in here, display welcome message. Now, I did not hit enter there. It did auto word wrap it due to the length of the line and the size of the box. So anytime we display something to the user, we will need to use one of these symbols. Now, we can notice that the message here doesn't really fit perfectly. Now, if I click once on a shape, I will have a variety of items here that I can manipulate. The blue dots on the edges and corners are the resize points. If I click on one of these and drag, so if I mouse over it, I get a directional arrow. I can click and drag and adjust the shape. Notice that unlike what is somewhat standard in Windows applications, if you drag the corner, it does not maintain aspect ratio. In most Windows applications, when you left-click drag on the corners, it'll maintain aspect ratio, but here it does not. It just simply allows you to change both sizes, vertical and horizontal, at the same time. Do be careful that you don't distort a shape past the point of being able to tell what it is. Like, that's kind of hard to tell what shape that is. So just make sure that in the process of trying to figure out how you want this to look, that you're not adjusting it to the point that I can't really tell what it is. Okay, that's display. Now, obviously, when we're doing computer programs, we're going to have to do processes. We're going to have to add things together, change, assign this variable to that variable, so on and so forth. And that is the square or rectangle process. Most of the time, this ends up being represented as a rectangle because you'll usually need to have some room to type here. Now, a process should be, as best you can, a single atomic operation. What do I mean by that? Well, let's take a look at a math equation. If I wanted to add two numbers together and store that value in another variable, as we've seen before, get in here. This is what I mean by an atomic operation. I can't really break this line down any further. I can't make this two steps. This is one step. What I mean, what you don't want to do here, though, is you don't want to have many steps, sort of all linked together. So on and so forth. So it's like somewhat random, nonsensical here, but it's like, I'm generating a random number, storing it in a variable, and then I'm creating a string that has a message, and then I'm going to generate another number and store that in a different variable. It's like, no, 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 no. The point of the process isn't to put in like everything that you are doing. It is one step at a time. If you can decompose the step reasonably into two separate steps, then you have two separate process boxes. So in this particular random example, pun not intended, a correct sequence here would be to simply say generate the number and store it in a variable, because that is an atomic operation. I can't decompose that any further. And then I would have another process for generating the string, another process for generating another random number, so on and so forth. Now, we're going to need to get input from the user. Now, for some reason in draw.io, they have the input here labeled as data, which I suppose is technically correct. If we are getting input from the user, we are getting data from the user. But this shifted rectangle here is the data option. Now we have a couple more interesting adjustments on this one that we can do as compared to others. Let me zoom this up here. We've got these two little orange diamonds. The one on the left controls how skewed the box is. Don't change it into a rectangle. It's no longer a trapezoid at that point, or rhombus, actually, I guess is the correct geometric term. We want to make sure it stays as a rhombus. So make sure you keep the slant on there. You can adjust the slant if you want, if it's like going to help the text fit a little bit better, but make sure it still has a discernible slant. The other dot controls how rounded the corners are. Honestly, I don't care on this one. If you want super rounded corners, you can make them super rounded. If you want the corners super pointy, you can make them super pointy. It's really kind of just doesn't matter. Or you can leave the corners at the default. That works too. And we use this anytime that we want to get input from the user. So you will typically indicate what kind of data are you getting here and what are you going to be storing it into. The final symbol that we are going to use is the decision symbol, which is this little diamond shape thing. So anytime we need to ask a question, is this value greater than that? Is this equal to that? Is this true or false? So on and so forth. We are going to use a decision symbol here to branch out our logic. So you will typically write what the question is inside of the diamond, so x greater than y, and then you will branch off. Which leads to an excellent opportunity to go over how do you create the arrows. When you have a shape selected and you mouse over it, you will see ghost arrows on the sides of the shape outline. You can use these arrows to link or automatically create. Notice that as I mouse over this, I do have the automatic ability to create a decision, a process. The circle does get a little confusing because circles can also be used for on-page references. We'll get into that once we get deeper into things. I've got this, decision, process, and a reference. I generally do not like to use those because that's very limiting, because we also need displays and input as well. I'll put my symbols on, and then what you can do is if you left click drag on the arrow itself, you'll get a little arrow coming out of it. And then this little arrow here can auto hook in to a shape. So there's two ways we can do it. There are sort of like mount points, and it's difficult to see because my cursor is kind of hiding it. But notice that once I get over the mount point on this shape, I get a little green arrow or a little green circle. Some of them, there we go. The mount point varies from shape to shape. You can sort of see it. Again, I'm not sure how well this will come over on YouTube. There's little blue marks that I can go to that will act as anchor points if you want to do it that way. As long as the shape highlights green, then I have successfully anchored the point to that shape. So as you can see, if I left click drag the shape around, the arrow remains hooked to it. And then I can do the same thing over here. Do not worry too much about controlling the shape of the arrows. You do have some limited ability to adjust, like how the arrows are shaped. But I generally prefer just to let it auto deal with the arrows and then just move my shape such that the arrow's like not overly weird, for lack of a better explanation. Now, you can also double click on the arrows to give them labels. Generally, the only time I will ever do this is on my decisions. So that I know what decision am I making. Is this true? Is this false? So display true, display false. And then for recombining, there is a formal, like, you can use the annotations kind of to recombine. It's not really what they're intended for. You can just also have both arrows go to the same point. Now notice here, like one arrow is embedded a little bit deeper into the other than the other. And you can just click on the line itself and then click on the terminator and drag to adjust. And so this indicates that, after this decision happens, we either display true or display false, and then everything returns to this point here. Like I said, there are other symbols, obviously, but these are the ones that we are going to worry about. Again, to go back over them, we have our start symbol, which should always be your starting point for a flowchart. We have the display symbol. Anytime we need to display information to the user, we need to use this. We have process. So anytime we're doing an operation like generating a random number, adding things, subtracting, doing a math operation, etc., if it's a process that we're doing, it goes into a rectangle. Input output is a rhombus. Slanted rectangle here. So anytime that we are getting information from the user, we need to use one of these symbols. And then a decision. Anytime we're making a decision, like we've got branching logic, and there's multiple occasions in which we'll have branching logic. We'll be getting to those. We will use this diamond symbol here. And then finally, we've got our terminator. Your flowchart should always end here. If you can't reach this point, you have a problem. You should always be able to reach this point from any and all branches or flows through the chart. If you can't, you are wrong. To label a point, you double click on it, which will take you into text edit mode. Or I should say, to label a node or a symbol, you double click on it. And then if you want to put a label on the arrows, which you should most definitely do anytime you have the arrows coming off a decision point, you double click on the arrow in question, and that will enable you to put in text. Now, if you have text that you don't want anymore, you can either just simply delete the arrow. You can also just simply delete the text as well by clicking on it, not double clicking like I did there by mistake. You click on it and then delete the text box. Okay, let's take a look at something that we can do to actually exercise using all these symbols. So I'm going to marquee select everything. Well, I'm going to marquee select everything except for my start and end blocks, because I do need those. And let's look at the problem statement here. I'm big into war games. I will use Warhammer 40,000 as an example point several times throughout these videos. So one of the things you do in Warhammer is you have a target hit roll. So say I hit on a 4-up. That means if I roll a 6-sided dice, or a d6, as the parlance goes, if I roll a 4, 5, or a 6, that means I hit my target. So a 4-up hit means I roll a d6, 4 or above, I make the hit. So problem statement, roll a d6 and determine if the roll hits or misses. Prompt the user for the target hit roll, display the roll, the target, and whether it hit or not. So here I have my pseudocode. So I'm going to display a welcome message, not explicitly stated in my problem statement, but generally a good idea to explain to the user, what is this program about? Why am I asking you to do the things that I am asking you to do? I'm going to prompt the user to enter a hit target, get an integer from the user, store in target. Again, you do not have to use this $ symbol here. And to be quite honest, when I'm writing pseudocode for myself, I don't. But to make sure it is explicitly clear in these videos, when I'm referring to a variable and when I'm just using a word, I do my best to remember to put a $ in front of my variables. So get an integer from user, store in target. Initialize random. We'll talk about random numbers later on, just accept that, yeah, this is a necessary step here. I'm going to generate a random number, 1 to 6. Remember your mathematics, square brackets are inclusive ranges. Rounded parentheses are exclusive ranges. So I'm generating a random number, 1 to 6 inclusive. Store and roll. I forgot one of my $ there. Fix that. Like I said, I don't always use $, so I forget to put those in quite a bit. So if roll is greater than or equal to target, then notice how I have an indent here to help me keep track of this. Set result string to yada, 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 yada. Else, if roll is less than target, set result string, yada, 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 yada. Anybody see the problem? Yeah, that's right. We're missing a step, aren't we? I'm not doing this, am I? And this is why we do pseudocode. I very much just unironically forgot to put that step in when I first wrote this. And as I was going over things, I was like, oh yeah, I forgot that step. Like, yeah, let's leave that in. So yeah, this is a good demonstration point. Honest to goodness, this is what I wrote the first time. This was my first draft. Just for whatever reason, completely spaced about just the display. But upon reading through it, I was like, oh yeah, I'm missing that bit. There we go. Fixed. All right, so that's what I'm working on here. So let's go back over here. So the first thing, I need to display my welcome message. Doesn't matter what the welcome message is. I don't need to put the whole welcome message in here. That's not the point of flowcharting. I'm going to drag this simple in. Display welcome message. Tweak the size a little bit. There we go. I'm going to display the welcome message. What's next? I need to prompt the user to enter hit target and get the integer from them and store it in target. So that's another display point. Remember, we don't want to combine things. I don't want to say display welcome message and prompt user for input. I want to have that as a separate step, as a separate point, because it is. Prompt user for hit target. And then I need to actually get that. So input. All right. And then these next two steps are going to be processes. And again, these are definitely going to be two separate flowcharts. Generally, not flowcharts, symbols. Generally speaking, when you do your pseudocode first, this is a good guideline. If it's its own line in your pseudocode, it should definitely be its own line in the flowchart. So I need to initialize random and generate a random number. So again, for my flow, these are processes. So initialize random. Put that down. And then another one. I probably need to, and I got one more for a pop-up. Again, using math symbols. Generate 1 to 6, store and roll. And then this is where I'm going to have my decision point, right? So coming back over here and looking at what I wrote up for my pseudocode, I need to determine if my roll is greater than target or if it's less than target. Now, this is where we start getting into a little bit of like, okay, how am I going to arrange this? So I am going to just take a moment and start linking things up. I generally like to use actually the blue outline instead of the green outline because notice how the arrow will go around. Also, it will cheerfully create more space for me to use if I go outside the grid. See how it does that? You only really have to worry about staying within this grid if you intend to print it out. The default size here is a standard page for printing. So if you keep everything within this page, you can print it out. But if you don't care about that, yeah, just increase the size of the grid. So I am going to go through here and just real quick link up all of my stuff I currently have. So that as I move things around and rearrange, I can see what my arrows are going to look like. There we go. All right. How and when you do your node tidying up is an entirely personal decision. I'll usually do what I did here. I'll go for a little bit, realize things are getting a little bit cluttered, tidy them up, line things up a little bit, go for a little bit, clean it up, go for a little bit, clean it up. I'm generally not too fussed about keeping things perfect because I don't want to spend a lot of energy into perfectly aligning everything when I might have to move things around to fix an error. Remember, the point of this is not to make a pretty flowchart. The point of this is to be able to visually represent the flow of your program and every single step that you have to take to try and find logic errors before you start writing code. This needs to be readable, not pretty. This is not, generally speaking, a customer-facing document that we are creating here. This is an internal document. Only other devs are going to see this. Like I said, readable, not pretty, is our goal here. All right, so I'm going to ask the question, is roll greater than or equal to target? And so if that is the case, I need to create my display string. Now, here's where you can get into a little bit of a debate. How exactly do you want to do this? How wordy do you want to do this? If I knew that the pseudocode was always going to go with the flowchart, I might just simply say create display string and reference the pseudocode. But since that is not the case here, I want this flowchart to be largely independent. I am going to come over here and just copy paste that. So there we go. And I'll set that there. And then I'm just going to do a Control-C, Control-V. I'm going to do that a little bit slower. With a shape selected, you can either right-click and do a copy. By the way, middle mouse button allows you to drag it around. Or with a shape selected, you can Control-C, Control-V, and copy a node that way. Because all I really have to do here is change the message from a hit to a miss. And those are my two results. Again, arrow. Yeah, I want the arrow to go that way. And then I'm going to label this. This is the roll greater than target. If that is true, I'm going to go here. And this is why we really want to label these. As in, like, you need to label these. Now I got to get both of these back to the end. Now, at some point, it is inevitable that lines are going to cross. And this is one point where you do have to be careful with letting the program help you. So let's look at this. This is a reasonably simple diagram, so it should be fairly obvious that this line continues past here, and this line joins in here. I would really prefer that this had an arrow here. Unfortunately, because it's connecting to this shape, it's just sort of like lining up with this line here, and both arrows are there. So notice if I click on this line, it does go all the way down like that. So there's no way for me to actually force it to be there. And if I delete this and try and redraw, notice there's no way to attach a line to a line. I could force it somewhat. By, like, doing that. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not the happiest about this. This is like the one point where it's like, I really wish I could force this program to let me put an arrow right there. But it's still reasonably easy to follow the flow of, I know I've got one entry point, one exit point for every node, which, by the way, is a rule that I forgot to explicitly state. With the exception of a decision point, which is why we have to have it labeled, every node should have one output. This process node cannot have multiple outputs. It cannot have, you cannot branch on this. It has one output. So this line doesn't have an arrow on it. Therefore, that is my output from this node. This line does not have an arrow on it. Therefore, it is my output from this node. And since it's merging with this output, I can just trace it and follow it along. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that this line is going over here. We do have the ability to make this a little bit clearer. Notice we've got line jumps. I can put an arc, put a gap, so can't really see it very well, but if I zoom in using the magnifying glass, I can see there's a little bit of a gap there. Now there I've got a sharp sort of like thing there. can also help it by I can click and drag on the text to move it along the line. And sometimes I don't like how far away it puts the true false from the decision, so I can like drag the true and the false back anyways. That's a minor nitpick thing. I'm never going to like, as long as I can clearly read the document, I don't care about it being nicely formatted. Like I said, readable. That's our goal here. But changing the arc makes it a little bit better. Unfortunately, like I said, there is no real way, at least that I have found in draw.io, to make it force an arrow right there. Still readable enough. I can visually tell that, I know this is my output node, and this is my output line. I'm hitting here, and I can tell by the arrow down here is like, okay, well, I'm just going to follow this line down to its arrow. And now I can check my logic to see if I have forgotten anything. Which I have. I don't know what I have against that display step. I swear that was not intentional. But let's go over the logic. So we start, display our welcome message. We're going to prompt the user for a hit target. Okay. We're going to get the integer from the user, store it in target. Okay. We're going to initialize random. We're going to generate a number between 1 to 6. We're going to store that in roll. We are going to compare our roll. Is roll greater than or equal to target? Yes, that is the correct logic. Okay, if it's true, if roll is greater than or equal to target, then we should display a hit. We're building the string saying that we hit. We are displaying the target in the roll. Okay, that's good. And then we terminate. Oh, there's no display here. Well, again, it's pretty easy to fix mistakes. I'm just going to delete out those 2 arrows. I'm going to grab my display here, set it up right before end. Display result string, and then rebuild my connections. That goes there, that goes there, that goes there. I said sometimes it like does weird things like that. So notice if I mouse over the line without it having select, if I mouse over the line, see how I get these 2-way arrows there? I can forcibly alter the shape of the line doing that. So I definitely do not want lines going through boxes. That is far too confusing. And then I'm going to come back in here and change the line jump to an arc. So we do have that little divot there for an extra visual representation of, yeah, this line's jumping over, not joining in. I could also reposition. And this is one thing, by the way, you see how the lines aren't shifting now that I've manually adjusted. As soon as you like manually adjust things, it can make things weird. And so sometimes you will be fighting the lines, trying to get it to do what you want. So like, see here, for whatever reason, it does not want to let me do the lines here like sensibly. Like I have to pull this over here in order for the line to come out from the top. Otherwise, it's just going to auto do it to the side. Again, I can forcibly change the lines around. I don't want any overlaps. So I could, alter it like this. Now it won't fit on a single piece of paper anymore, but still, I can see things. So it's like, yeah, it's like sometimes you do have to fight the lines a little bit. That is normal. There's been on more complicated diagrams, I have spent, it seems like, more time arguing with the lines than I have sometimes doing the document. It's not really, just feels that way because it's annoying. But yeah, you are going to have to argue with the lines a little bit. And I also have you going to the wrong thing. I'll just click and drag you there. Argue with the lines some more. Okay, and then fix this. This needs to have the true, horribly misspelled. And now I can go back through and check my logic. So start, display welcome message, prompt user, get the integer, initialize random, generate the number, compare the generated number to the target. If that's true, we hit display message, terminate. If it's false, you missed, display message, terminate, program done. Now I'm ready to go and write the code. Now, for the first few programs that you are going to do in this course, doing these diagrams will be mandatory. And if your diagram does not match your code, that will cost points. So this is a mandatory step that you will do for the first couple of programs. After that, doing these diagrams will be extra credit. I cannot stress how useful of a tool this is. Like, I still use these. If I am trying to figure out the logic on something that's particularly complex, or if it's something that I'm not very familiar with, I will do one of these diagrams. I will do pseudocode when I am trying to work out the logic of a program. This is part of algorithm development, like thinking up the algorithm, writing it out, diagramming it out, and then stepping through and checking to make sure that you don't have a logic error. If you have an error here, it's going to be easier to find it now than it's going to be when you've written the code and you're trying to have to use the debug tools to figure out why the program isn't working. Again, a final quick recap on the shapes that we see here, and then we'll be done with this very long in the tooth video. Start. This will always be your starting point. Terminator. This will always be your endpoint. Display. Anytime you need to display something to the user, like you're going to be using a print statement, you will use this symbol. If you need to get something from the user, you are going to use the data symbol. A process, like you're making a system function call, adding numbers together, just doing a thing, and it is important, a thing. Then you use the process block. And if you need to branch, you need to use a decision point, and you must label the output arrows so it is clear what the true and false conditions are for this. The other rule to keep in mind is that with the exception of the decision node, every node has exactly one output. Decision node is the only node that is allowed to have two. No other node is permitted to have two. And two is the maximum, because true, false, yes or no, that's the only decision that we can make. It is possible for a node to have multiple inputs. In other words, this is a join point for a branch, but one output. That is a hard rule. Never, ever put more than one output to a node unless it is a decision node. Okay, that's it, he says after nearly an hour long talking about a single program. Make sure you review through this. Like, use this tool to diagram out, like, say, brushing your teeth, just to get used to like how you use the symbols, play around with it, make some nonsense, see how it works, and we will start using this in code next week. Until the next video, have a good day. Let's take a look